Hi, I'm Tiffany from Wex Photo Video, and we're here today in the streets of Vienna to look at architecture photography. Now, I'm going to give you some of my top tips for photographing buildings, but first of all, let's talk about why we're here, because Vienna is known for its stunning architecture. And inside of those beautiful buildings, like the one behind me, there is some really incredible paintwork. There's some amazing sort of structural integrity inside. So we're going to go and see what we can get today. Now, I'm shooting on the Canon R5. One of the reasons that I bought this out is because it's an incredibly fast camera. It's really steady. The stabilization that's built in means that I'm not going to have any issues getting some really nice shots. And actually the sun's come out, so it's even better. So this is a 24-70, it's a very versatile lens, very classic in your clip bag. The only thing I would say is that people take this out when they're new because they want to get pictures of a building as a whole. You're not a tourist. That is not the aim of architecture photography most often, and a lot of the time this will sort of be a hindrance more than a help. So what I would recommend is a 7200. I think a 7200 gives you a lot more flexibility, and you can get a lot more beautiful shots of like Symmetry or, you know, bits of buildings that people wouldn't necessarily see with their naked eye when they're standing in front of it, and that's how you're going to make something that's a bit more interesting and something that you're happier with. Now, I'm currently shooting on the R5. The R5 is a wonderful camera. The in-body stabilization really helps, especially when you've got a lens this big. So yeah, when you're shooting inside, the light can always be a little bit tricky because unless it's got a lot of windows, which this building doesn't, you're going to be working in a lower light environment. The R5 is amazing in low light. It's a really great camera to shoot with. It's really stable when you're using a heavy lens, and I'm just a really big fan of it. So obviously this is quite an expensive setup. I'm not going to ignore that fact, but you can also achieve the exact same thing with the older version of the 7200 that Canon have, and you can pick up a used Canon body, a DSLR, for maybe a couple of £100s. So we've come to the Kunsthaus Museum, which I'm not going to try and say twice, so that we can have a look at some of the internal architecture. One of my favourite tips when shooting architecture is to look for buildings that have a beautiful inside. You'll often find like patterned roofs. Patterned roofs can be a great shot because you can get the symmetry, you can get the detail, and then if you have a really long lens on, you can also zoom in and get some of the bits that people might not notice. One thing I would say is really important in a building like this is that sometimes your shots can come out really yellow, and it's incredibly difficult to fix in post if you aren't paying attention to it. My tip for this sort of thing would be to change your white balance to something that's more nighttime-esque. It is very low lit. Yes, you're inside, yes, there are lights, but often in museums like this, they keep the lighting particularly low and particularly yellow, so just be aware of it. So let's just talk about some of the things that we're looking at so that you know what to look for when you're shooting. So this particular room has a really beautiful, intricate detail on the ceiling, and there's a lot of symmetry happening. So just behind our filmmaker, Luke, you can see that there is like a big archway. There's some really beautiful lines that are coming down, and then they're contrasting with the way that the building then veers off. And so that's the sort of shot where you can get a really nice detail shot. It will look brilliant in edit. It will be quite unique to what other people are shooting because a lot of them will be shooting forward, and it just makes you stand out a little bit from the crowd. I would say there's also some really nice shots of really close-up detail, but again, you need that 200mm to get it. So we had to do a photographer's and a filmmaker's nightmare, which was abandon our bags at the door, because that's the rule here. So unfortunately, it means that I had to pick a lens. And that trusty 24-70 is calling my name right now because there's so many shots I would love to get that are a little bit less zoomed in. But that's actually something to really think about, is like, where are you, what are you doing, what are you shooting? Because the truth is that I need this for 90% of the shots. And so because of that, this is the right choice. But you may have to sacrifice that when you go into certain buildings, especially ones that look as beautiful as this. The other thing that I would think about when you're trying to shoot architecture is symmetry can really make or break your shot. That's not to say that it always has to be symmetrical, but what does need to happen is if you're looking for symmetry, you need to make sure you're bang in the middle, because even just a few centimeters to the wrong side just ruins your picture completely. We're inside the Platz Cathedral, which is where we were outside of at the beginning of the video. Now, it's really busy in here, so it can be quite difficult to get anything nice just because you're fighting the crowds a little bit, but you can still try. You just need to take your time, be a bit patient, let some other people go first or maybe go in between you. It's always worth it if you get the shot in the end. So in terms of my settings, I'm currently on manual. Because we're inside, I'm on f2.8 to give myself the most light physically possible, and I'm shooting at 160, 160th of a second. It's a mouthful. And so that's just helping me make sure that there's enough light to get any of this, because as you'll see from the video that Luke's taking, there's not a lot of light in here and the windows aren't really bringing in any natural light from outside. Let's talk about leading lines, because when I first started shooting buildings, somebody told me that it's a really great way to get some easy win shots. And when I say easy win shots, they're the kind of shots where they just look beautiful because the building is doing the work for you. So you're looking for a series of threes, you're looking for lines that go up horizontally, maybe they then have some contrast with lines that go straight across. What you want to avoid is diagonals. Often when you shoot a building and there's a big diagonal, unless it's really obviously meant to be there and it's like this, generally the picture looks like you just didn't frame it correctly. And of course you can fix it in Photoshop a little bit, but you really want to try and frame up whilst you're there so you can see what you're getting. I always also give myself 10% crop. What I mean by that is when you're shooting buildings in particular, it's very easy just to accidentally cut off a bit of the top, and then the picture becomes kind of banal. And so what you want to do is shoot with the idea in your head that you're going to crop by 10%. So this is a perfect example of where the building is working with you. So there's quite a lot of buildings where you get these big, tall, grandiose windows, and this has two that are right next to each other, perfectly symmetrical with the same thing either side, and a line going straight down the middle. So the picture's kind of framed for me already. It's high up, so I'm not going to get people in, because as you can see, it's quite busy. So yeah, that's an easy win shot for me, and so you should always be looking for those when you're shooting buildings. So my final tip for shooting in a building like this is to look for points of interest. So as you can see, it's so busy in here, so it's really difficult to get shots. And especially when you're trying to get the shot that everyone else is trying to get. So over near the fence, there's a lot of people, it's really difficult to get through. And not only that, but everyone's got the same picture. So that's not really what you want. So what I did notice is just behind everyone else, where no one was looking, there was an organ. So it's a really great point of interest that no one else is photographing. There's lots of space so that you can photograph it yourself, and you just stand out a little bit more. So again, points of interest, always a great look. So my 3 takeaway tips from today would be to look for leading lines. Leading lines are always fantastic when it comes to architecture. My second takeaway tip would be to go somewhere where you've got space to shoot. It's really difficult to shoot when you've got a lot of people around. And finally, look for symmetry. Symmetry is your best friend in architecture. It can do a lot of favors when it comes to making your pictures beautiful. So, I have been Tiffany, this has been Vienna, and we'll see you in the next video.